Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, we're going to go on a bit of a field trip because having done glow lichen in the previous episode and warped foliage and crimson foliage in the episode before that, I have decided, I don't always plan these as like themed weeks, but I've decided this is Weird Plants Week, I guess. It's kind of the only way I can link it to today's theme, but today we're going to go on a bit of a field trip out to a place we have been before in order to look at something that we have seen before but not really messed around with too much. We're going to look at coral today, and we're going to take a trip to the coral reef, the warm ocean biome that I have found over by the first desert I ever encountered in this world, the very, very thin desert that I still have a nether portal out to in the nearby jungle, and we're going to harvest some coral. But before we do that, we need to take a trip back to spawn to grab something that I made a while ago but never really used. And this is why I need to do more work on my nether hub, because look at the amount of hoglins. I just taken a screenshot of these because it's so absurd. The amount of hoglins that spawned as I was on my way back through this crimson forest. Actually wild. Insert 30 to 50 feral hoglins meme here. Anyway, let's go back through to spawn because I need to pick this up from the fisherman's house. Right here on the corner, hovering above this crafting table for a long while, if I can actually enter the fisherman's house. Hello? Oh, I'm stuck in the water. Is a conduit. And the conduit is something that we talked about briefly but never really fully activated because for that we needed prismarine and I hadn't raided an ocean monument yet. But now I have raided an ocean monument, we can finally put this thing into action and I can explain a bit about what conduits do while we're out there at the coral reef. I believe I left some of the prismarine stuff down here, and for this we will need a bunch of prismarine. We can bring any type of prismarine with us, including sea lanterns, but prismarine bricks, regular prismarine that's made out of 4 shards, or dark prismarine will all be functional for this. Unfortunately, the sponge doesn't count. But we'll bring a stack of that with us. I've cleared out my inventory a little bit, and we're going to bring a shulker box because what we're bringing back from this coral reef is going to take quite a lot of inventory space. We'll throw a stack of prismarine and the conduit in the shulker box for now. Let's head through to the nether and hopefully not get killed by all these hoglins in the process. Luckily for me, hoglins are scared of nether portals, so it wasn't all that bad. In the end, I did have to take a few of them out just to make sure the place was a little safer, but we got some pork chops and now we're back over here at this jungle lagoon. We came in through the jungle temple portal, and if I fly over this way a little bit, we should find ourselves back at the desert and the coral reef that we discovered previously. Yes, here we go. So we have the desert biome right here, and adjacent to it we have a couple, actually, pockets of warm ocean that contain corals growing, and these are fascinating places. They also look incredibly pretty as you swim through them or fly around them. The coral area will actually be lit by sea pickles, which give off light in a similar way to candles. We have coral plants, coral fans, and coral blocks basically everywhere, and you'll even find schools of tropical fish swimming around with the occasional poisonous pufferfish. So bear in mind, while pufferfish only swim around in 1s and 2s typically, you may occasionally stumble into one and find yourself on the receiving end of some poison. Tropical fish are actually kind of fascinating in themselves, since they are procedurally generated in terms of their shapes and their patterns. There's a variety of shapes and colors that Minecraft can choose from, and there are about 4,000 combinations of tropical fish. So if you're planning on collecting tropical fish, you're going to need to keep a pretty comprehensive spreadsheet. But what we are really here for is the coral itself, the coral fans, the coral blocks, and the coral plants. So coral has some pretty interesting properties in Minecraft. It is one of the only blocks that can die and still give you a block. Now, if I mine this with a fortune pickaxe right now, you'll notice that the block we pick up is a dead fire coral block. We picked up one of these red blocks, but it broke down into a dead version of the same block with the same texture, just a more grayscale color palette. Now, the same thing doesn't happen if we take one of the coral plants or one of the coral fans. If we try and get hold of those without Silk Touch, they will simply break. So the solution to that is to switch to our Silk Touch pickaxe and try and harvest them, and that way we'll actually get hold of the coral plant or coral fan itself. And there are 2 different variants of each type of coral in terms of the fans and the plants themselves. These are typically just called fire coral, where a red fan variant of this, like this one down here, will be called a fire coral fan. The difference really is that coral plants, like this one here, will only grow from the tops of blocks and can only be placed on the top of a block, whereas the fans can grow from any surface of a block except for the underside. You can find them growing on the sides of blocks and on the tops of blocks, like so. slope. And as you can see already, the different variants of coral are going to take up a lot of inventory space, which is why I've brought with me a shulker box, because we're going to be able to stash each of the different variants of stuff in there, more or less. There are 5 different types of coral, which are horn coral, brain coral, bubble coral, fire coral, and one more that I can't remember. Tube coral, that's right, the blue one. The blue one is tube coral. Okay, so there are 5 different variants of coral, each of which has a dead variant, each of which has coral plants and coral fans. And the coral plants and fans can have a dead variant as well. The trick here is that coral always needs to be in contact with water in order to stay alive. While we can get hold of the blocks themselves by using silk touch, and we can do the same with the plants and fans, if they aren't immediately horizontally or vertically adjacent to water, they will die. And that includes the fans and the plants as well. Once these blocks are dead, unfortunately, there is no way of reviving them. A reminder that we need to take better care of natural coral reefs in our world's oceans. But we do end up with a lot of interesting building blocks out of this, and this is why the coral color palette and the coral plants are so fascinating to use. Having picked up some more of these coral fans, if I place one of those on a block that's completely immersed in water, it's not going to die. Just because I've moved it and put it somewhere else, it's going to retain its natural color and life. Going to kill a couple of the skeletons that have spawned on the shore here at night, because I will need a little bit more bone meal for this demonstration. Because while bone mealing the sea floor in any other location will just produce a few more of these sea grass plants, if we bone meal the floor of the ocean in a warm ocean that has coral around it, we will get a few extra coral plants growing around here. And you can even bone meal the coral itself, although it won't always produce coral plants and fans that way. While this means that the plants and fans are renewable, unfortunately the coral blocks are not. Once again, a reminder that we need to preserve these things and be a little bit more careful with them. Sea pickles, on the other hand, the light source that you'll find around here, can be renewed simply by placing a single sea pickle on a coral block and then applying some bone meal to it, which should grow it back up to 4 sea pickles, all of which you can harvest and continue to renew that way. And so while the environmental message here is obviously one of the coral reef biome's better strengths, I think it's really interesting to start using some of these blocks as building blocks, and maybe forego the idea that we are ruining some kind of precious natural resource by doing this. Because if you take a look at the coral blocks themselves, they could make for really interesting rock formations if we put them in a cave setting, like the dripstone cave that we have been working in for the last little while. I'd like to vary up the stone formations there with something a little bit unusual and different looking, and so I think it's probably going to be a cool idea to harvest a lot of coral and, you know, as much as I hate to say it, intentionally kill it in order to work with 5 extra stone textures that we can put into the walls around our dripstone cave. And so I'm interested in harvesting these coral blocks in massive quantities today. I'm going to be using the silk touch pickaxe for the majority of this, because that means we'll also be able to get hold of the plants and fans without destroying them entirely. Although if you break the block that they're attached to, you will lose the plants and fans, so we'll have to be careful to break those first. But this is really where the whole process becomes a little bit more dangerous for the player, because as you can see, having not brought my respiration helmet with me on this particular trip, I'm having a hard time staying underwater for very long. I run out of air too quickly and I end up suffocating. And that is why we brought the other contents of this shulker box, the conduit and the dark prismarine. If you'll remember, the conduit came from a heart of the sea, which we found in a buried treasure chest after locating a shipwreck, and 8 nautilus shells, which we mostly acquired from fishing, although they can be bought from the wandering trader, or found as loot from the drowned. If a drowned is holding a nautilus shell, when you kill it, it will pretty much drop that nautilus shell 100% of the time. And since then, the conduit may as well just have been a floating light source to us. It does provide light level 15 in the surrounding area, but it doesn't really provide anything else until it is activated. To activate a conduit in its most simplest form, first of all, we need to have a 3x3x3 cube of water all the way around the conduit itself, and that can include waterlogged blocks, I believe, but at the very least we have to make sure that the area is completely covered in water sources. Then around the conduit, 1 block away from the conduit itself, we're going to make a ring of our prismarine blocks, which once again can include any type of prismarine and sea lanterns. And once we've done that, the conduit opens up into this. You start to hear a mysterious heartbeat, and you'll notice a status effect has appeared in our top right-hand corner. If I open up my menu right here, it will just say Conduit Power, which is kind of mysterious, doesn't exactly explain what this is. But what you'll notice is that my air bubbles have completely frozen right here, and the coral reef around me is looking a lot brighter. What Conduit Power does is threefold. It gives you better water visibility so you can see further and see in a brighter radius underwater. It gives you a permanent water breathing effect as long as you stay within the radius of the conduit to receive conduit power, and it will help you mine faster while you're underwater. Basically, it gives you aqua affinity, but that stacks on top of any aqua affinity you might already have on your helmet, meaning that you effectively have a haste effect when mining underwater. So right now I don't have my aqua affinity helmet on, but it's still possible for me to mine out these coral blocks pretty swiftly. And the fact that I don't have to resurface to refill my air every time is really going to help us mine out a bunch more coral in this area. With its current frame though, the conduit doesn't have its full range of power. For a start, if we swim a little bit further away, the conduit power effect will start to diminish, and here's one of the pufferfish that I warned you about. If you get a little bit closer to them, they will end up puffing up when they notice the player. And that can very easily lead to you being poisoned if you're not careful. But as you can see right here, we're a little bit further away from the conduit, and that conduit power effect has diminished until we get back within range. So right here on top of this block of coral is more or less the cutoff. We no longer have that conduit power effect, and it's not going to take effect again until we swim a little closer. However, the radius of the conduit can be expanded by building another ring around the outside of it, similar to the other one, but at a 90-degree angle. So we'll have to take out some of the other coral blocks here, but now we've built up a more complete frame around the outside of this with a 5-block long kind of plus shape centering on the conduit like this. The radius has now increased, so we're over here standing on the piece of coral that we were before, and as you can see, the effect keeps refreshing to 12 seconds here in my inventory, and we can swim a bunch further out. I think if we go about another 24 blocks or so, maybe we'll try about here. Yeah, we are now this far away from the conduit, which you can barely see under the surface over there, and this is the point at which the conduit power effect has started to run out. To complete the conduit, to give the effect its maximum range and to activate its final abilities, we can add another ring horizontally around the outside of this, effectively connecting it up at the corners halfway up these vertical pieces. And now you'll notice that the center of the conduit has changed. It kind of takes on the appearance of an eye. The conduit power effect hasn't grown any. We don't have conduit power 2 or 3 or anything like that, but at this point its radius has reached its maximum, and conduit power will be active for us up to 96 blocks away. This also carries the effect of attacking any hostile mobs that come within an 8-block radius of the conduit. They will actually take a little bit of damage for every second they stay here inside the radius of the conduit. And so if there are drowned nearby and they end up swimming towards the conduit, or if there are guardians around, they will start to take damage when the conduit notices them within an 8-block radius of a fully activated frame like this. As soon as I take one of these blocks away, however, you'll notice the eye closes up in the center. When we put it back in, the eye should open up again. So you do need every single block in the frame to be present in order for the conduit to reach its maximum capacity. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending on your point of view, I don't see any drowned in this area, so I can't really demonstrate that effect right here and right now. I think it's probably the illumination of the sea pickles that's preventing them from spawning in larger numbers around here. While we're still messing around with the conduit, it's worth knowing that you don't have to have all of the blocks in a perfect ring around the conduit for it to activate. Basically, it will activate once it has at least 16 blocks arranged around it like this. But unfortunately, the conduit doesn't really notice blocks that are placed on the diagonal, so we can't fill in the bottom of this platform here and expect the conduit to react to that. The conduit does have to have one block of water between it and the adjacent blocks, and they have to be on horizontal angles instead of being diagonal. So now that we set up the conduit, we have the potential to do a whole lot in terms of mining out the coral around here, but I think before I do that, I'm going to head off and grab my diamond helmet, because that's the one that has aqua affinity on, and it should make this process a whole lot faster. Hey folks, welcome back. So our coral reef now has a bit of a bald patch around here, I guess, and it's looking a little darker thanks to the absence of sea pickles, which I might just spam on the ocean floor anyway, because frankly, I think it's kind of nicer when it's all lit up, and I don't have much that I plan to do with the sea pickles. But I have been and done some tests over at the dripstone cave for which of the corals I think would fit best, and I think the fire coral here, the red one, is actually ideal for what I want to do with this, and you'll see a bit more of that when we head back over to the dripstone cave. But yes, in case you wanted to see the difference, I've got my gold helmet and my diamond helmet here, and the gold helmet, as I break a few of these blocks, like it takes a second or two. There's like a couple of pickaxe hits, and you can see the pickaxe is flailing a bit more wildly. That kind of illustrates how the conduit power effect is working. It's basically like a haste effect that allows me to use my tools a little bit faster. But compare the speed I was mining those blocks to the speed I mine when I have aqua affinity on my helmet, and the blocks break nearly instantly. So it really does make a difference to stack aqua affinity with the conduit power effect. And you're certainly going to be saving yourself a lot of time if you do that. So I'm going to take down a bunch more of the red coral here, the fire coral, and I'll probably leave the remainder of this alone for now, because I've gathered a couple of stacks of each, but it's clear from my tests that the fire coral is perfect for what I had in mind. So I'll grab a bit more of this, and I'll see you back over at the dripstone cave where I can show you what I've done. So we're back, and a couple of things in here have changed. We'll get to what's going on down there in a second, but first of all, I'm going to head up to what I'm thinking of as the foreman's office, which is still just a couple of chests up here, but this is where I've been stashing all of the coral that I have brought over with me. And I want to show you a couple of bits and pieces. First of all, I stashed all of this stuff in the chest because while we might use it to decorate the cave here and there, and it makes sense to have a couple of living coral plants, both for pops of color and because there's a bunch of water around here, so why wouldn't we? I'm going to largely ignore the coral plants and focus on the blocks, which are all in this chest over here. And we've already killed a few of them just so we can see the differences between them. As you can see, used a fair amount of the fire coral I brought over here already, because when it comes to the join between the textures of dripstone and stone, I kind of think that this, the dead fire coral block, is the closest match we're going to get in terms of the grain of the texture, the fact that it's got kind of streaks that go this way and that, and the color. You'll notice that in terms of its comparison with stone, this is something you have to be a little bit eagle-eyed or, concerned with this kind of stuff to spot to begin with. But look how different this block looks compared to the stone all around it. It's got this slightly warmer, like slightly orangey red kind of undertone to the whole thing, which makes it look a little odd next to stone. But then when you consider that dripstone is kind of orangey red to begin with, it makes for a kind of interesting transitional block. Now, the problem is none of these blocks are rotatable, right? So you can't place dripstone facing this way and have the left to right streaks, or what I think of as the left to right, but they're actually east to west streaks in terms of the geometry of the game. You can't have those rotated so they align north-south. It just doesn't work that way. And the same goes, unfortunately, for the fire coral. Even though it looks like it has a few more streaks that go this way and that, those are north-south streaks, not east-west. So it's not going to look perfect, right? It's not going to align with the stone completely. But it's certainly going to stand out a lot less than some of the other dead coral designs. Take, for example, dead brain coral, which is, honestly, very cool looking. It kind of looks like moon rock. It's got these craters or whatever in it already. But in terms of the transition from dripstone to stone, it really stands out. The texture is nothing like either of the other two blocks, so it's not really our best block to use. Likewise, the bubble coral block has this really obvious kind of popcorn vibe to it. It's got a lot of bubbly texture in there, hence the name. Not the ideal thing for a transition like this. Tube coral has the same thing, but worse. It looks like clusters of frog spawn or eyes or something like that, and I feel like that's, once again, a little bit too bubbly for the transition we want to use it for, and horn coral is maybe the closest other match, but I still think the fire coral out of all of them wins out. There are clusters of highlights in the horn coral that simply don't exist in the fire coral. It's a more even balance of light and dark in the texture in kind of the same way that dripstone and stone have. And really all of that was just a very long-winded way of justifying my choice to mainly use fire coral blocks in the cave when we want to transition between dripstone and regular stone, because if we come on down here, I have been making a couple of changes to how this area looks, and we've already started to lay in some pathways that are going to lead around the cave to various landmarks and work sites. I figured this was going to be the best place to start because it's at the base of our crane. We've got a few steps leading down here as though the crane operator can oversee what's being loaded onto the platform, make sure that the platform isn't going to tip over to one side if the weight distribution is okay, and that it's not exceeding the weight limit so that the platform can be pulled up, all again within the fiction of the world. It's a aesthetically built crane. It doesn't really matter, but I like the idea of them having a way to walk down to this platform and then some steps back up to the crane. But obviously people are going to have to load stuff onto the platform, and so there are a set of wooden walkways around here. These lead down to the cave floor, from which we'll probably create slightly more formal surroundings for our warped and crimson foliage machine and our glow lichen machine, but I really like the fact that this can be seen as a ramp that people could bring some of the copper ore that they've been mining up to where the lift platform would go. And if we wanted to, we could even have the lift platform move down and put into position here if that feels like the right sort of thing for this area. I've started to take down some of the natural pointed dripstone formations that are down here on the floor of the cave because I don't want them to get in the way of what I'm building, and then I can rebuild them in convenient places like this where they serve as kind of dividing walls and just obstacles that you can imagine the people who set the mine up just having built around. But then in areas where the floor is going to be a little bit more natural, that's where I want to start adding in some of the fire coral, and I've already started adding some of it around the base of this crane, kind of to imply that the crane has just been plonked down here and some of the dripstone and other stone has been misplaced by whatever mechanism has driven it into the earth here to secure it, as though there's some kind of anchoring pin down there that's just pushed all of the rock up and out of the way around the sides, or that the crane has been here for long enough that dripstone sediment has started to build up around the outside, and the fire coral is really meant to be another form of that. And where there are some areas of the floor in which the dripstone takes over in these large patches, I decided to mix in a little bit of the dead fire coral and a bit of the glow lichen that we were farming at our glow lichen machine to create our own customized dripstone features. This wasn't here before. We have built this basically ourselves, and I think the back is still a little bit open, but I built more or less an approximation of one of these smaller dripstone block spikes just to see what we could do mixing in the fire coral, and I've got to say I'm quite happy with the results. If you take a look at it from a bit further away, it looks a bit more like a natural rock formation that just has a couple of different materials mixed into it. Likewise, around the outsides of areas like this, I want to start mixing in a little bit more of the fire coral. We'll mix it in live, but naturally it's going to die off as it stands out here without any contact with water. That block down there has died as well, so it's not like it doesn't die if it doesn't get exposed to open air. We'll start working it into the pillars like this, and it'll just end up looking like another natural geological part of the cave, which I think is a perfect detail around here, and is one of the ways we can use coral blocks aesthetically in survival builds. Once again, provided that you're okay with the idea of killing coral in the first place. And something as simple as a tiny amount of flowing water like this will keep a coral block alive. So if you actually want a coral block to die off, you're going to have to make sure there isn't any flowing water around. But expensive though this block is, I think it's really going to start to make a difference at a distance like this, where we can see a little bit more interesting cave strata happening, and the blocks can seem a little unfamiliar. I like the idea of it being more than just stone and dirt and the natural stone types. I really think having a bit of this coral in here is going to bring the area to life in a unique way that we haven't really seen from natural Minecraft generation. I also think in combination with granite, we can use this to make some pretty interesting gradients with the dead fire coral blocks, because if you consider granite is a slightly more saturated block on the pink scale than dripstone is, then you add in some dripstone, you add in some fire coral, and then you give it something like andesite to cap it off here at the end. You've got a really interesting gradient of colors there. There's a little bit more like of the hotter pinks in there, and there's a little bit more of the pale colors, and that kind of graduates into stone on this side, and you can put it in for some really interesting results in combination with other materials. Just because these coral blocks are a little bit tedious to obtain does not mean we should count them out as building materials, and so I think it's going to be really neat to see where we can fit these in and what's going to stand out when we develop a little bit more of this area. I didn't want to put any of the dead coral underneath here because naturally from above and from the other areas of this cave where we're going to be active, we're not going to see too much of it underneath the walkway that I was building here. So after testing it and deciding I was satisfied with it, I ended up moving a lot of the stuff that I built down here, replacing it all with stone, and we're working in bits and pieces of the dripstone blocks as accents down here, just to make sure it feels natural if we happen to glance down here while we're working at the glow lichen machine, for example. If we wanted to, of course, we could take things in a different direction. We could turn this lake down here with all of its dripstone spikes into a coral reef all of its own. We could recreate our own coral reef in here, and of course, with the ability to just place these coral blocks anywhere we wanted to underwater, we could recreate some of the shapes we've seen over at the reef, plant some of the plants on here, and even replant the sea pickles to light this area up so we didn't have as many drowned spawning, and it could be a pretty effective way of turning this into some sort of feature. And while I've decided that's not what I actually want to do with this, I still have something in mind for this lake, because we have the dark prismarine and the conduits that we took over to the coral reef, and I'm going to put those down here in this lake, because there are some sections of the lake that actually dive further down here into a waterlogged cave. This aquifer goes on for longer than I expected it to, and so I think it'd be kind of cool to set up a conduit down here and have access to that water breathing effect while we explore down here. Who knows? We might find some interesting ores and even a little bit of rare stuff down here. So roughly in what I think of as the middle of this area, which is going to be down here, a little bit out of the way, I'm going to set up the conduit with the 3 rings that we set up around it over at the coral reef. I'm going to make sure the conduit is in place now. That way, once it activates, there we go, we get a much better view of our surroundings, and honestly, it's kind of nice not to have to worry about suffocating down here and drowning. So now that our conduit is set up here, you'll notice that the eye is fully open, meaning we built the activation frame correctly. We can explore this aquifer down here, mine up all of the ores that we find, and potentially swim back to this in case we encounter any of the drowned. The visibility we get from having a conduit also opens up this area for building opportunities in a really interesting way, because while it's kind of noticeable from the particles in the air and the blue shading in the distance, that kind of distance fog that you get underwater, that we are underwater in the first place, plus of course the bubble columns rising or falling from the magma blocks around here, we're effectively able to float around. So it's almost like we have a really weird low-key version of creative mode flight in survival. If we wanted to build something down here, it's as simple as just grabbing the blocks we want to bring down here and building out a platform, and we can fly up to build the next section of the platform, and so on and so forth. And the clarity of vision that we get from having the conduit down here means that it's a pretty effective environment for building something a bit more creative. With the limitations, of course, being the radius of conduit power, but we don't have to just have one conduit down here, we could have multiple, and so our dripstone cave project could even extend down here into the aquifer if we wanted it to. There could be mining dwarves diving down here in order to get hold of some more precious resources that weren't accessible to them on the surface. Not certain that's a theme I'll go with, because it involves expanding this project quite significantly, but I think we'll do at least one exploratory diving session down here to see if there's anything we can get hold of that wasn't available to us on the surface. In the meantime, surfacing on the lake, suddenly it feels very dark again, returning to the surface here, and we still have conduit power whenever we're in water, so I think even if we step in the water over here, as long as we're within a 96 block radius of the conduit, we will still have access to conduit power. Now I've been out of the water for 12 seconds, the conduit power has worn off, but if I step back into this, I have conduit power as I rise up this waterfall inside the cave, and it's honestly pretty cool that it has that kind of radius of effect. We don't even need to be in the same body of water as the conduit. As long as we step into any puddle within radius of the conduit, we will get conduit power. So that's just some of the fun that we can have with conduits. I think in future we'll take one to raid an ocean monument so that we don't have to worry too much about water-breathing potions and night vision as we battle some of the guardians. We could even have it attack some of the guardians for us if it's built in the right location. But anyway, I think we're going to spend a bit more time terraforming this dripstone cave, and maybe we'll work out some other places we can put some of the weirder plants that we can find in Minecraft. But that's where we're going to leave this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.